Welcome to the Orchestrate All the Things podcast. I'm George Anatiotis and we'll be connecting the dots together. A pragmatic and direct approach to ethics and trust in artificial intelligence. Who would not want that? This is how Beena Ammanath describes her new book, Trustworthy AI. After reading the book and discussing the motivation and approach behind it with Ammanath, we concur that's an accurate description. Ammanath is the executive director of the Global Deloitte AI Institute. She has stints at the likes of GE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and Bank of America in roles such as VP of Data Science and Innovation, CTO Artificial Intelligence, and Data and Analytics leads. She has worked her way up from SQL development and DBA, and has also startup experience as well as involvement in board advisory and nonprofit work. In other words, she's experienced, well-rounded, and well-positioned to write a book on trustworthy AI. As Ammanath related, part of her motivation was her desire to help organizations start off with ethics and trust in AI on the right foot, and another part was her frustration. I hope you will enjoy the podcast. If you like my work, you can follow Link Data Orchestration on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
So my background has been across a variety of industries, and I've been at Deloitte for the last 2.5 years now. But before that, I was a CTO for AI at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Before that, I led data science and innovation at GE. I've worked at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, E-Trade, a few startups which no longer exist, British Telecom. So throughout my career, I've always been anchored in the data space. I've studied computer science. So I started out as a SQL developer, a programmer, grew into DBA, led data teams. And I've always, kind of tried to do between large companies and startups so that it keeps, keeps me grounded and keeps me agile. And it's always fascinating to walk into a totally unknown domain and scenario and then try to figure it all out, right? And I think part of it also has been part of my career success has been anchored on that fact. Though in the past few years, I have realized and acknowledged my strength is, exactly that ignorance and going into a brand new company and then asking those questions, which really drives transformation, right? And so we have building AI products, AI solutions, data products and solutions and taking it to market end to end. And I've realized being an intrapreneur within a large organization is something that, that is actually my strength. So that's what my role has been in the last, prior to joining Deloitte. At Deloitte, I lead our Deloitte AI Institute, which is a global AI institute, looking at just the applied AI space, because that's what I needed when I was in my prior roles, right? Because the space is growing so fast, so rapidly, there is so much noise around it, right? But when you're part of a business, the problem you're trying to solve, optimize your supply chain, for example, right? What you don't know is, how do you solve for it? Is there an AI product that exists that you can buy off the shelf? Is there a startup that's working on it that you could potentially acquire or be part of so that you can accelerate the product roadmap? Or do you partner with academia? So AI Institute tries to bring all of that together along with the fuzzy aspects of regulation and ethics and the lack of diversity. How do you make sure the AI that you're building is robust and reliable and trustworthy?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. That was a very nice intro, which sort of explains the angle you've taken for the book. And so the book, which is about to be released, if I'm not mistaken, on the 22nd of March, is called quite aptly, and it's quite aptly named Trustworthy AI. And actually, the first thing that drew my attention was the title itself. I think the term trustworthy AI is probably getting less publicity, let's say, than other terms such as AI ethics or responsible AI.
Yeah.
And this is an area I also have an interest in. And well, we're not alone in this. I think it's a concern for many people for many different reasons. However, both AI ethics and responsible AI also are a bit fuzzy, in my humble opinion, in the
Yeah.
sense that, well, they entail too many things. They have so many facets, and so it's difficult to pinpoint them, let's say.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that it looks in the book, that one of the things that you've aimed to do is actually sort of pinpoint this trustworthy AI term in more concrete, making it more concrete, basically. So you've listed different facets, and you've tried to use them as different angles to examine trustworthy AI and what it means. So I wanted to ask you to just quickly iterate through those facets. I know it's hard because it actually takes an entire book to do that, but just quickly, the executive summary, let's say, for each one of those. And
Yeah.
what led you to this, to come up with this definition, let's say?
Yes. Okay. Maybe I'll start with that latter part of the question. What led to this definition, and then go into, the definition itself. So we are in this interesting phase with AI, George, as you know, where there is a lot of research still happening. The technology is not fully mature and fully developed, but it's being used in the real world because it drives a lot of value. And using it in the real world, actually there are side effects which we've not thought about. Because the technology is not fully
Mhm.
mature, we don't know all the side effects. So I put trustworthy AI in that bucket, of that third bucket, where it is all the side effects that come beyond the positive value creation. And the reason, the term trustworthiness, right? For it's great that AI is creating a lot of value and companies are using it, but at the end of the day, the end users need to trust it to be able to to really drive that adoption and scale of AI. So trustworthiness is essential. And what are those dimensions of trustworthiness? And I have about 13 dimensions that I go through in the book, right from bias and fairness, which are the most obvious ones and which everybody talks about.
Mhm.
And then there is transparency and explainability, fairness and impartiality, robustness, reliability, safety, security, responsibility and accountability, and privacy itself. So for it, to take a step back, I shared with you my background, right? What the reason for me to write this book was because when you hear about AI ethics, you hear mostly about fairness and bias, and then you
Mhm.
also hear about transparency and explainability. And that's not really the factors that fall under trustworthiness, because fairness and bias is relevant. It's a very important dimension, but only when it's directly impacting humans. And here's what I mean by that. If if you are building an AI solution that is doing patient diagnosis, fairness and bias super important. But if you are building an algorithm that predicts jet engine failure, fairness and bias not as important,
Mhm.
right? So it is, trustworthy AI is really a structure to get you started to think about the dimensions of trust within your organization, within your business context, to at least start having those discussion on what are the ways this could go wrong and how do we mitigate it. So moving that whole topic of philosophy, of ethics and responsible AI from philosophical arena to the real world arena, and how can the C-suite, how can leaders, how can data scientists, how can they just get started, right? And in by no means would I say that the dimensions I've listed or the questions that you should ask are complete, but it's a starting point, because
Mhm.
today there is no starting point. It is so high level, it is so theoretical that most companies struggle with, where do we even get started, right? Should we hire an ethicist? Should we get an ethics officer? I think, having some semblance of structure is important. And my background, in my background, I think these are the dimensions that's important. And even if you think of something like bias, right? When you are, again, it's human data, but patient diagnosis and law enforcement, if the algorithm is biased, terrible, right? But if you're using, algorithms to do personalized marketing, and say you serve the wrong ad to the wrong person because the algorithm is biased, it's a different weightage, right?
Yeah.
And today, what happens in most businesses, in most scenarios, ethics tends to be put into this separate bucket. And I think it needs to be part of the use case, the context to be able to address it. And there should be a structured way to think about it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, well, what you said is very much valid. So at the moment, it's sort of Wild West, let's say, out there in a way. So
Yes.
people don't know where to begin. Well, some of them are more concerned than others, but even the ones that are concerned are sort of at a loss, like you said. So what do we do? Do we hire, I don't know, philosophers or ethicists, or how do we approach it? So helping them understand the problem and ask the right questions. It's something you also mentioned in the beginning, and I have to say that doing what I do, asking the right questions is like half 50% of the success in a way. If you manage to ask the right questions, then you're on the right track. And specifically for something which is so intangible, let's say as trust, even forgetting the whole technical infrastructure and just limiting, let's say, trust to the concept of trust. There's
Yes.
many dimensions to that, even just there. So we talk about when we talk about trust in a person or in an institution, there's already at least two types of trust. So I trust that that person will do what they say they will do, but do I also trust that they're able to do what they say they will do? So
Yes.
if you also add the technicalities, let's say, and all the data aspects and bias and fairness and all of that stuff, it just really explodes in a way.
Yes, yes, so true, so true. And the reality is, in most AI projects, you focus very much on the value creation, right? The ROI. What impact can I have? Whether it's more cost savings or new products, right? The focus is more on the value creation, and all that I'm suggesting, is spend some time thinking about what are the ways this could go wrong, because the people who are designing, building it are the most brilliant minds who are focusing so much on value creation. Can they spend 10% of their time to think about what are the ways this could go wrong? Because it will, then they can build in those guardrails, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and actually a good motivation to do that, well, besides the obvious fact that it's the right thing to do, is that if things go wrong, they can go very wrong, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's really going to hurt, the end goal, which is value creation, as you said. So it really pays off to be proactive in that
Yeah.
respect.
Yes, yes. And, even if we can reduce, we hear too often, oh, it's an unintended, consequence. We didn't think about it. This book is like, just think about it. Even if you can
Yeah.
capture 50% of the unintended consequences, it's a great start, right? You may know that it's impossible to think of all possible scenario and have 100% coverage on the side effects. But even if you just have 50%, I think it's a great start, and we're not doing it today, right?
Mhm. Yeah, you already talked about the importance of asking the right questions, and I find that this is also reflected in how the book is structured. So this is something that appealed to me a great deal. So I think it's meant to serve as an overview and an introduction, as you said, and it looks like the main audience would be CXOs, basically. So different uh, C-level suit executives, and I get that impression because, well, you use those roles to develop sort of fictitious scenarios, and you also use a fictitious company throughout the book, and in that setting you create different scenarios, and you have those executives being set up, let's say, in different situations, and through that you use it to develop, let's say, the scenario and see, what can go wrong and what these executives should be asking, and in a kind of, a problem analysis solution way, which I find is a very user-friendly, let's say, way to approach the problem. So I wanted you to just share a few words in well, what led
Yeah,
you to adopt that approach, and whether I also wonder whether your actual real-world experiences have helped in any way shape that.
absolutely, absolutely. Look, one of the advantages having worked in different industries, and now at Deloitte, getting that exposure to different industries is, that I bring a perspective that's broad, but it can also go deep. And we know that the topic of ethics, most of leaders are, think it's a philosophical thing. It's more theory, and it doesn't apply, don't know how to grasp it, right? So it is targeted at CXO, current and I would say future CXOs. So the managers, the data scientists who are aspiring to be managers in the future. So it is really for anybody who works within an organization, but primarily for CXOs. And the reason I structured it on a fictitious company is because then it's relatable, right? It is, how do you translate this complex topic of trust, right? Like you said, it is extremely complex. It is very fuzzy. So how do you get your arms around that complex topic in a real world scenario? And the company name BAM is actually my initials, Beena Ammanath Manufacturing. I just
Oh,
came
nice.
up with it. But I wanted to make it more relatable so that companies can actually think about it. The other thing, nuance, if you noticed, was also, I don't think ethics is just targeted for the companies who build the AI products.
Mm,
Every company should be thinking about it, even if you're just a consumer, even if you're buying an AI tool, you should look at it from a trustworthy perspective, because you're bringing it into your organization, you're bringing all those risks along. So I think it is relevant for every organization. So it is also put from that user perspective, also as a builder perspective. And it was intentionally done that way so that it catches the user's attention and moves from theoretical complex topic into a real world scenario. And to your point, most of the scenarios I've encountered to some extent are variations of it, right? There's also a belief that ethics is just for data scientists or just for the IT team. And that's not true, right? It's relevant for the CHRO who might be buying AI tools for recruitment. The CFO whose team might be using AI for some level, some kind of account management or document management. So there is, it's relevant for every C-suite. It's not restricted just to the IT team or just the CEO. I think every person within the organization needs to know what trustworthy AI means for their organization and how does it apply to their role, right? Even if you're that marketing intern who is part of a vendor discussion, they should know what questions to ask, right? Beyond the functionality, to say, what kind of data sets have you trained on, right? What are the uh, aligning behind those principles and making it real in their role needs that level of acceptance. So my hope is with the book, at least it provides a base level understanding. And trust me, I've laid out 13 dimensions, but there might be another dimension that's relevant for their organization,
mm.
right? But at least this is a conversation starter, and it gets them started on that journey.
Yeah, and I think in a way the takeaway from that would be healthy curiosity is good. So be don't be afraid to ask questions, and well, ideally try to make them relevant, but don't be afraid to ask would be a good start. And to add to your point, I think what you described about that the fact that it doesn't just it's very hard to draw lines basically. So if I'm just using, let's say, an AI system that somebody else built, that doesn't mean I'm not in some way potentially accountable for it. So that goes
Yes.
into the specific dimension of accountability, which is pretty well explained in the book as well. So when things go wrong, there you may be accountable as well. So
Yes.
you'd better know, at least to the degree that concerns you, what's going on and what needs to be done to remedy it if things go wrong.
Yeah, ethics is one of those, and trust is one of those. It cannot be aligned to just one person, right? Oh, this person is the responsible for, AI
Yeah.
ethics across the company. It just won't work. And I've seen it, many of those examples are, like I said, are variations from my experience. And I've seen it too often. I was like, oh, let's just bring in an ethicist and, that person can take care of everything. And it doesn't, it just won't scale in the real world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The book is providing that grounding to the real world of, don't believe that somebody else will come and solve it for you. You Everybody needs to be part of it. So translating to that real world is the biggest, it was the biggest gap I've seen. I haven't seen any other, book on, on the topic. It's not like I had a lot of time, or, I wanted to, but I was getting frustrated, George, because of the focus on just on fairness, bias, and few of these, dimensions. Whereas I think if you're an organization, there are so many other dimensions you need to think about, and you really need to make that decision as relevant to your organization. It's not just adopting something that's put out there and and bringing in somebody to execute it. It doesn't work.
Mhm. Yeah, and to add to that, I think I've also seen many, I would say mostly technical approaches to addressing, let's say, fairness and bias. So,
Yeah,
and don't get me wrong, these are absolutely essential, even in some cases, and it's good to be aware of them and to apply them, in your day, in how you structure your data sets and in your algorithms and all of those things. But they're not enough. So it's not they tend the solutions presented in this area, let's say, tend to border on solution, in so-called solution. So okay, we have an issue, let's find a technical problem for the
yeah,
solution, and it's usually it's
yeah.
not enough.
It's not enough, and it's not looking at it holistically, right, from a business impact perspective. Because you might choose, yes, we know this algorithm, our algorithm is biased, but we are making a thoughtful decision to move forward with it because the impact, the risk is not as high for the personalized marketing
Mm.
example, right? So, making an informed decision, as opposed to blaming it on, we didn't think about it. um, I
Yeah.
think I think that's, if we can move in that direction, then I think we've made progress.
So I'm going to try and sit a little bit and give people a preview, let's say, of it's not exactly the final chapter, but the pre-final chapter, in which you deal with trustworthy AI in practice, and you try to, well, distill the analysis in some actionable
Yeah,
steps that people can take. And
yeah,
those steps are named identify the relevant dimensions of trust and cultivating trust through people, processes, and technologies. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those. Again, just a sneak preview, because obviously you can't explain the whole
yeah,
the concept in its entirety in the time that we have. And also,
yeah.
if you could introduce the lens of socio-technical systems, because this is something that you use in order to explain that. And I think it's very relevant, and I think people would benefit if they knew about it.
Yeah. Okay. The number one step is to, think, and these are more as buckets of items. It might be called differently, but when you think about how do you operationalize it, the first step is to, bring together key stakeholders, a C-suite board, and define what does AI ethics mean for our organization. And
Mhm.
the next step from a people perspective is to educate, train, make every employee AI ethics fluent. Who they should understand what does our ethical guidelines mean, and it's very easy to do. It's not something you need to create from scratch, because every company you join, you have an integrity training, right?
Mhm.
Just append to it, right,
Yeah.
and say these are the trustworthy AI principles we align behind, and this is how it applies to your role. So including it as part of your training to make sure every employee is empowered is the first step. And then the next step is to think about, do you need a chief AI ethics officer? Do you need an ethicist on staff? In most cases, if you are designing or developing AI products, then you need somebody, right? You need that level of expertise because your data scientist cannot take care of it. It's not a technology solution, right?
Yeah.
But if you're just a consumer of AI solutions, you probably don't need an ethicist, but you need access to somebody who has that deep expertise who can influence. Because the solution for trust, as we said, it's not just a technology problem. There is a technology component, but there is also the component of social sciences and philosophy and anthropology, looking at historical patterns and being able to bring in that perspective of what are the ways this could go wrong. I think that you need that SME, but you probably, if you're just using it, you probably don't need it, to hire a full-time role for it, depending on your usage. It depends. So making that informed decision from a people perspective of who's going to, keep an eye on this going forward. From a process perspective, and this is the most crucial one, right? Looking at your existing processes and saying where should we inject the changes that we need to make sure that we are sourcing ethical AI products, or we are building trustworthy AI products, right? That is super important. So say you are a big tech company who builds their own AI products, in your project management tool, whatever it is that you might be using, add in a step saying, what are the ways it could go wrong? Like every project has an ROI column that you need to fill. Have a column which says, here are the ways that we think as a team that it could go wrong, right? So, and it should ideally not be blank. I'm sure there will be some things that as you think about it. So, it could be as simple as that, adding in a question that's, in your project management. When you're sourcing, adding in that question, to ask from your vendors, right? Make it part of your vendor sourcing process. So changing existing process to, capture these challenges early on, but then also providing your employees a 1-800 number, or I call it 1-800 number, but it's, who can they call if they feel they're stuck, just like you have an integrity helpline, right? Having some kind of a helpline, they've got the training, but they are assessing a vendor and they are not sure, there are going to be those scenarios. Who should they call? So changing the process to include how can they reach the SMEs if they need to, right? So basic changes like that in the process is super important to make it relevant. And from a technology perspective itself, it is really looking at the software that you're using, the software that you might be building or you might be sourcing. How do you put in guardrails within those technologies, right? And this is most relevant for the companies that are developing AI, right?
Yeah.
Putting in those guardrails, embedding it within the technology, making sure that you've addressed all the risks that you identified in your process, within your early project process, to make sure those guardrails are in place. So I think having these different buckets is a great way to start operationalizing trust. And I'll tell you, you will never get it fully right, because it's all going to be learning, and there are so many different angles to it that you need so many different perspectives. But I think you'll at least get started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the takeaway for all of that. And if I may just add to that, I think what comes out of the discussion so far is that, well, none of it is alien really to people who work in organizations. It's all about things that they do already in one way or another. So this people, processes, technologies dimension that you just referred to, I'm sure this is, people already do that. People already have that in place. They just need to take AI seriously enough to facilitate caring for it sufficiently, and just add it to their processes and their inner working, basically.
Yes, I agree. Completely agree.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you like my work, you can follow Link Data Orchestration on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook.